Hello, everybody. My name is Raul Aparicio, and I'm talking to you all the way from LA. I am a senior environment artist over at Sony Santa Monica. I have over 12 years of experience, and I have contributed to games such as Rage, Borderlands 2, and most frequently, God of War. On the weekends, I have been teaching at the Namon School of Visual Effects, cover in the environment creation class. And so today I've come to you to share some of my own personal insights on environment building. I feel like environment building is a very, very involved discipline where you have to be a kind of a jack of all trades to get by. Especially nowadays where games have gotten very intricate with all the PBR and all the environment building and stuff. However, I feel like in some studios maybe some people do a little bit of everything, and maybe another studio people specialize. Over at Sony Santa Monica, we pride ourselves to be owners of a work. Our motto is always quality over speed. We take our sweet time, but the only reason why all this works is because we figure out how to make things good. We come up with a very good workflow, and we help each other go forward as a team. So, through my talk, the biggest takeaway from it, I hope, is that you learn how to make yourself better, because it's very important that you understand that you don't necessarily have to do things like everybody else is doing them. You should do things that work for you, right? So, that means that you set up your own hotkeys, your Maya, your Blender, whatever you're using should be completely custom, tailored specifically for you. So I hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and I'll be talking to you in the Q&A. Thank you so much. This first part deals on how to set up Maya. A lot of people complain that Maya is not a good program, but I beg to differ. I think Maya is probably one of the most solid programs out there because it is meant to be customized. It's not meant to be used as it is. And that's why it lacks in a lot of areas, because I think it's so legacy that people who really try and are able to get a lot out of it. So if you understand how to customize Maya, you should be able to do a lot of very cool things, right? So the first thing you need to know is that under Documents, Maya, in the version of Maya, you're going to find all your preferences and scripts. So if you understand this entire directory structure, you're going to be able to do some really cool stuff, right? And I'm not going to dig too much into it, but I am showing you where all that is. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pretty much just reset that, right? So if it doesn't exist, Maya just makes a new one from scratch. So it's good to know, because if you mess something up or you break something, all you got to do is put it on your desktop initially, and then you get to it. So the next thing is turning off things that you don't need, such as the Mesh plugin and other stuff that you definitely don't need, and turning on things that you probably do need, like the FBX exporter or the OBJ exporter, right? And next is the biggest thing that I really don't like about Maya, which is the file browser. So you need to kind of go into setting preferences and then find a dialog type and then make it OS native. That way, now Maya should be able to use the OS native browser, and then you should be able to navigate things easier. I personally never make projects per se. I just navigate to my bookmarks and stuff, right? So following other things to do is setting up the display options, right? So displays are important. You should be able to differentiate if you have a soft edge or a hard edge. And I don't like seeing creases, and that's just me. So whatever you want to turn off, whatever you want to turn on, it's up to you. But definitely make sure that you have soft and hard edges turned on. And next up, I'm going to talk about the ODN tools, which they are named after my dog. So the ODN tools is a suite of tools that I've put together over the last couple of years, slowly but steadily. And what these are is because I came from using Moto, using Softimage, and I could not stand Maya in the beginning because it was so slow. And it's because I didn't understand that I could mod it to fit my needs. So I tried really hard to do it, right? So it's a whole custom set of it's a whole custom set of hotkeys. But I'm not gonna cover everything today because I just simply don't have time. So what I will say though is that I'm gonna show you how you can go and modify the grid and do a couple other things. So what's important here is to know that you can move your pivot point, and then at the default grid we're going to pretend that each of these grid lines is 1 meter, right? So what that means now is that if we have 4 meters, it's already like bigger than a house. So 8 meters, dinosaur size, 16 meters, the size of a building, right? So now that doesn't mean that you're gonna go tweak the Maya settings for that. We're just gonna pretend that everything's meters. So if you go into the ODN scripts and open up the grid tools, you're gonna find that there's 2 functions, one to increase the grid and one to decrease the grid, right? And these are very, very simple things. So if I trigger one out, you will see that it's going to increase the grid and it's going to decrease it. So I'm only dividing the grid in half, and when I'm increasing the grid, I'm multiplying it twice. So it's not like I'm not going to go past over 1. 1 is going to be the maximum grid size, right? And then like a quarter and a half is going to be a fourth of a quarter is going to be the smallest grid size that I can get to, right? So Maya is a little confusing in this regard because a lot of people don't really understand how to do these things. I have not taken the time to make this easy either, but I know how it works, so I just do it. So here you can see me going up and down. All I'm doing is I'm highlighting the text and I'm hitting enter on the numpad. And what that does is that it triggers the script, right? So that's one quick way to see if things work or not before you go through a whole hassle of setting up your hotkey, right? So once you kind of know that things do work, that's when you actually go and open the hotkey editor, which it's an entire beast on its own, and it's actually kind of easy to use once you kind of understand how it works, right? So what I'm going to do is first, I'm going to go and create my own presets, right? So, be called Raul. So that way, if I screw things up, I always revert to the Maya one, and it will happen. So the second thing is I'll make a new runtime command with the script or the command with the line of code that I wanted to run. So, and in this case, the source, ODN, and the name of the function that I wanted to run, right? Once you create these runtime commands, you're going to set them to hotkeys, right? So once you come down here to runtime command and you type in ODN, you'll see a full list. So if you're nice and tidy with all your names, you should be able to see them all like that if you search for them with the prefix, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use period, and I'm going to use comma for increasing and decreasing the grid. So now I have hotkeys that allow me to increase and decrease the grid. And that alone is insanely powerful because you should be able to do a lot of very cool stuff. Thank you. So this section, I'm going to be talking about curves. But first, I'm going to do a little breakdown of what is it that I'm trying to achieve. So when you have something that you kind of know that you want to do, the first thing you should do is try to break it down into modules, right? Into pieces that repeat. So design means repetition, right? And the reason why all of this looks very insane is because it's repeating a lot of elements, right? And if you just kind of break it down to its bare essence, then you're gonna realize that it's not really that intricate, and it's just a couple pieces that need to repeat. Obviously, if you were to make this in real life, it will take a long time. But because we're doing it in the computer, it's not that bad. So what I'm doing is I'm just basically sketching out pieces and brainstorming what I want things to be. How many pieces I think I need. So this is a very critical step that a lot of people miss. Because if you don't plan ahead, you're just gonna be like lost and not knowing what to do. And the process of this, you know, you're gonna have ideas of maybe saying that, hey, maybe I just need to make a straight trim and reuse it to create this crazy facade in the background, right? So what happens after that is that once I get it all figured out, you know, I start building things, right? So I usually like to start building things with curves because curves are very easy to use and you can get a lot done with them. Once you have an object created from a curve, then you can maybe start doing some old school low poly modeling. So the one thing I want to say before I start is that I've been using Blender a lot lately, and Blender has some insane tools, but it's very important that you know how to do this manually at its core, so that when you use tools like Blender that have all these automation tools, that you actually know and understand why people are doing what they're doing, right? When I was working on God of War, a lot of the stuff that we made was done by hand, and that's why it looks so good. So you just have to suck it up and, you know, learn it the hard way so that you can cut corners later with you know, with automation tools. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make an EP curve, right? So EP curves are linear, CV curves are curvy, right? You know, easy way to remember this. So when I start doing this, I don't really concern myself too much with the grid. I just kind of make shapes. You know, whatever happens, happens. And then I just kind of run with it, right? So here what's happening is that I'm trying to see, you know, I'm following on my other screen, I'm following the reference. So I'm trying to make a profile of one of the first bases that I have in the concept, right? So sometimes though, it might be a little too hard to try to do it all at once in one go. So what I do is I kind of sketch it out a little bit so that I then go and flatten stuff out. I move things around. I tweak things. Also, curves in Maya are very powerful and very easy to use, but a lot of people don't really like to do it because it's new to them or maybe they never used them, right? So if you need to add a new point, what you do is you want to add a nut. I don't know why they're called that way, but that's just what you do. So you basically go and select control vertex, you point where you want it, and then you add a nut. And that's how you can add more points. So after that, you know, you just kind of keep adding points and moving stuff around. You know, maybe you snap things to the grid. So grid snapping hotkeys are very important here because you need to know that X snaps to the grid, B snaps to a point, C snaps to a curve, and there's probably some other ones, but those are the ones I usually use, right? So here though, what will end up happening is when I'm done with this, I want it to be like airtight on the grid. So once I kind of get things to where I kind of like them, you know, maybe I get crafty and I try to reuse some of the curves that I already made to make more stuff out of it, right? So once you have the profile you want, all you do is you go to the revolve options, and you should be able to get what you want, right? So at that point, instead of mangling all the points on your mesh, you know, you're only moving the points on your curve. And this is very important because I used to be, when I used Moto, there was none of this, and I used to kill myself trying to do this the wrong way. So now there is, right? So I just do it this way. And what's cool is that at any given point, you can add more divisions, you can tweak things, and then everything stays in the history, and you keep tweaking your curve until it looks like your stuff. So you can also go do this thing where you can tessellate things in specific ways. So here, for example, I can set the number of revolutions to 4, and that way this becomes a square. And what that means is with this, I can make pillars, I can make all kinds of stuff, right? And it gets very complicated and intricate later, but this is bare essence. And with this alone, I'm able to, you know, craft out the majority of things, right? So as you can see, I'm just tweaking the curves, right? You just tweak the curves, you have fun with the curves, and Eventually, when you are getting to a point where you kind of like what you're seeing, that's when you jump in the actual model and you add bevels. You maybe soften some edges, you harden some edges. It really just depends. I usually like to put bevels on things because they hit the light well and everything. So at this point, even though I'm not going to sculpt this yet or anything, this is all going to be just for pure block out. At Sony, we call this stage R sheet. So when I'm R sheeting these things, I'm not thinking about normal maps. I'm not thinking about sculptures or anything. I'm really just pure shapes, because what this will do is that I can go and work with the level designer and I can make pieces, and together we can assemble a full level without having to worry about things. And then once the pieces are made, then I move to making this final, right? So as you can see, I'm still able to add even more detail to the curve, with the model still in place and everything. So this is a very, very powerful technique. It works in many other ways, and I really encourage you to use this. So eventually what will happen though is that I'm going to be done, and then I will export this into ZBrush, where I will go and take my sweet time to add all the cheapies and all the bevels I need to make this look good, and then I will make a low poly. But again, that's not the goal of this lecture. I'm not going to show you that here. So the rest is just pure tweaking. So I hope you enjoy this, and we'll move on next. So this next section is about how to put it all together. Here I've gone and I basically already built a big chunk of the level. I figured out a lot of the pieces, and I'm on the roll here, right? So this is the real deal, and I'm probably not going to do a lot of talking on this because it's just going to be very monotonous, but I will try to point stuff out, right? So first of all, I'm doing this in one screen. I'm doing the recording on one screen, and it's very important for me that even though the screen get cluttered, that you can see what I'm looking at as far as the concept, right? So sometimes clients want you to be very accurate on what you're making, or directors do too. But sometimes you just kind of have to figure stuff out first before you become super accurate. So instead of killing myself and trying to match the perspective and all that stuff, I usually just try to match the shapes as much as I can, right? And I'm so used to doing that things usually just come together. But it does take time, and it does take a certain amount of patience to do this, right? So here, I usually do a lot of very simple low poly modeling. I use the cut tool, the extrusions, bevels, and stuff like that. But what you're not seeing though is that I have a lot of hotkeys for stuff. So for example, bevel becomes Control B, extrusions become Control X. I have hotkeys for bridging, so bridging is Alt B. So on and so forth. So one tip I will give you for hotkeys is to try to put them on your dominant hand. So I'm right-handed, so that means that my right hand is always on the mouse. My left hand is going to be on the left side of the keyboard at all times, and is usually doing things that it's not supposed to be doing. But that's how it is, right? If you have to stop and let go of your mouse to hit a key, that's just the same as if you're painting and you're trying to figure out how to revenue swatch up color, right? So you have to be fast about this, right? It takes a little bit of skill and time and effort to do this. It's not for everybody right away, but if you really try really hard to do it, I'm pretty sure you will be able to do it, right? So a lot of the times I just use simple modeling, and if you notice, I also use several viewport windows. I keep increasing the grid up and down. I make sure that everything kind of snaps on the grid, and then I start getting crafty and I start using curves, right? So once you use this curve, it's really easy to add a lot of detail very quickly, right? But it's also time consuming. You know, you can literally nudge this curve forever, right? So what I suggest you do is that you kind of place your curve where you think it should go, and then you bring it and you revolve it, right? So what you're about to see is me going and saying, all right, look, I'm going to put it over here, and now I'm going to say revolve, right? So now I move that mesh around, and I set the revolutions to 4, and now I have a nice little square piece, just like it looks like on the reference, right? So with that, at that point, you know, I just keep doing stuff, right? And if I want to tweak things, I tweak the curve. If I want to add more stuff, I add more things by hand, you know. So it's all free game from this point on, right? But the goal here is to create a modular piece that fits on the grid. So the key numbers here are multiples of 4. Multiples of 2. So that means that this thing is going to be like a 4-meter tall piece, right? And then the reason why you want to do that is because later it's easier to bake it down, bake on the normal map, you know, and create bigger pieces. Now, in games like Call of Duty and all those games, sometimes people use multiples of 3, and I think that's valid, but you just need to know that whatever you do, make sure your stuff fits on the grid airtight. You know, you will save yourself a lot of grief if you just make sure that everything's airtight, right? So once you kind of have it in there, you know, sometimes once I have a profile with the trim made, I do this thing where I basically, you know, for those of you who ever done any woodworking, I create a picture frame, right? So I go and I line them up, and then I go in the top view and I use the cut tool, and I cut them right on the corner, right where they intersect. And what you're going to see is that this gives me a very, very normal, very natural feel, rather than me trying to extrude things and trying to like bend them in a certain way. Now Blender has a very cool symmetry modifier that does all this for you. Maya doesn't have that, so I'm used to doing it like this. And when I do use Blender, I just, you know, go boop, and everything just kind of falls into place. And that is why I was saying earlier that sometimes it's good that you know the hard way of doing things, so that when you do find a faster way, things just kind of come together faster, right? So at this point, it's all about tweaking your meshes. And, you know, you just gotta work it up baby steps, right? So you're gonna keep tweaking things using scales. So every time you scale, you wanna make sure that you don't scale too much, because it will break things. It just, you know, it just does. So make sure that you're conscious of all the changes that you're making. Instead of scaling things, I usually like to move points around. So I'm not really using any crazy things. It's all just simple hotkeys, and, you know, just me remembering a lot of repetition work that I usually do. So now see, I got that facade in the background made, and that can become an entire full modular piece that you can export to Unreal, right? So when you're making modular pieces, I've seen people go too small, you know. I've seen people do like little door frames, little windows and stuff. But if you know that this one configuration is always going to be used that way, why not just export that out, right? You know, it's easier than having to deal with all these things and creating a prefab somewhere and all those things. Obviously, you know, you can't reuse, right? So that's when I already thought ahead, and I said, well, okay, I made this one trim, and this one trim is used here. So this is where things get very interesting, because here what I'm saying is I'm kind of foreshadowing and getting ahead of myself and trying stuff just to make sure that when I do it for reals next time with the final big piece, that things are actually going to work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the top trim to create that little fleet Roman triangle facade thing that you see. So what's going to happen is right now I'm not worried about polygon, I'm not worried about UVs, normal map, nothing. I'm just making shapes. But I'm making sure that the shapes are under grid, right? It's very important that you make sure that all this is airtight, nice and clean. So okay, so you know, a lot of the times you can reuse pieces, right? It's because you kind of know that something works here, some, you know, might as well just reuse it, right? So I'm gonna be quiet for a little bit while this happens. All right, so this is what I was talking about. So what happens is, you know, you already have modular pieces that you intend to use in Unreal, and at this point, it is valid to do a little bit of kit bashing and a little bit of hammering away to make sure that things in fact fit. But sometimes things are just not gonna fit, and that's when it's okay to just, you know, see what you can do to make them fit. Because that way, when you make this for real, when you start assigning textures and all that, you will know that you're gonna run into the problem, but you will have solved them already, right? So something like this, typically you can get away by just having a bevel corner in a nice tileable material with some vertex paint. You know, if you have the luxury of making high polys with sculpts, you know, obviously it's gonna look better, right? So once everything fits and it looks nice and neat, you know, you should be able to move on to make finally move on to the one thing I've been wanting to show you, which is the top. So the top is going to be a little challenging because it's got a lot of stuff going on, and then what I want to make sure that it stays as modular as it can possibly be. However, remember what I told you. If you know that something's going to be used a certain way, might as well just build it like that and then send it to the game like that, right? There's no need to kill yourself trying to figure out, oh, I'm going to make a piece that does this and a piece that does that and then all this thing, right? If you just know that things are going to be that way, just make them that way, right? Now, if for whatever reason you do have to break it down into pieces, then you do that. So what happens here is that I have this shape that has a circle, right? And the most important thing about circles is that they need to have they need to have a center, you know, and that center expands and then you get the perimeter, right? So here I'm saying that this is where everything is going to irradiate from, right? This is how you build circular hallways. This is how you do everything. You know, you study architecture, they show you that. So the next thing you know about this is that you can also extract curves from objects, and this curve can be used to also extract other curves so that you can loft stuff on it and get the profiles that you need so that you can later do some booleans and some cutting to get exactly the shapes that you want to see, right? So it does take a little bit of work to get it to work, but you just have to be patient, right? Now this video is playing out, I think 4-5 times faster than it really is, so I don't work this fast, right? So you just have to know that it's a process, you know, and if you do it right, you know, everything will kind of fall into place. So here what I'm doing is I have a profile that I made from a piece of geometry that I already had, and then what I did is that I extracted a curve arch, and now I'm trying to position it in the best way that I can so I can cut it and I can somehow merge it to the other thing so I can end up with the piece that you see in the concept, right? And this is one of those things that if you need to sculpt them uniquely, then you do them, but it will be already all figured out in this step, right? You don't have to do it again later. You just do it here. So I do my picture frame technique where I, you know, intersect the adjacent pieces, and then I go and basically roll them all together and spend my sweet time doing that, right? So I'm gonna be quiet for a little bit while this happens. All right, so what's gonna happen is that you're gonna find out that things don't quite work the way you think, and so sometimes when you make curves, sometimes you do have to wrestle them, right? You just need to know that curves have a starting point, and their starting point they need to start one after the other, right? If you do that and you use the join tool, you just see that curve go right in. So now what you're seeing is I finally was able to do that shape that I've been after, right? And that what's going to happen though that it's not going to be 100% accurate because who knows, math, I don't know. But when things don't quite work, then you just have to suck it and take your sweet time to get it somewhat right, and then you're pretty much just gonna have to weld things by hand. Only in that intersection, not at the ends, because if you do at the end, you're gonna break out the tiling, right? So the idea here will be that at any point I can do this arch anywhere, right? And I guess eventually I did get it right. But it does take a little bit of trial and error to do this part, right? Because you're gonna see that some points just simply do not line up, you know. But if you think about it, this piece is such where these guys grab a big rock and then they made that corner piece, because now you have another piece that goes in the next revolution, and then one that goes in the middle, and then one that goes right here. So that is why I said that it's totally valid after cutting it to go in and just moving the points and making sure that everything snaps together. But at the very end, you gotta make sure that things are actually where they need to be, so that everything can stay modular and be modular all the way to the end, right? So now comes the part where I did this piece, but now I realize that this piece is going to be crazy because it's going to be outside of my Pato pixel per meter ratio, which is what I usually use. But I don't really care because this is such a large piece that it should be okay, right? So eventually, though, what I'm going to do is I'm going to reuse the same trims to create the top, right? So one thing I want to talk about is when you have several pieces, you can merge them together, or you could create a group and then move the pivot point of that group to where you want to manipulate that group those pieces that you are moving, right? I often choose to do the group thing because I don't like merging things together, because at that point it becomes a very, very big pain to separate things. So that is how I'm able to move so many pieces at once, because what I'm doing is I am moving a group, right? So once you kind of get things done and ready, usually you have to check it with lighting, right? So this is where you would jump in the game and run around the level and stuff, but sometimes that's not quite necessary. So if you just put a new light and turn on the renderer, you can get some very nice accurate lighting, right? And you can also get shadows, right? So and that way you get to see a very, very cool, pretty representation of your level and how things look like. Yeah. So this is pretty much it for this thing. I'd show you an entire overview of how I go about modeling things, right? So I'll move on to the next thing. So very often I hear people saying, "Oh, I want to be a technical artist. I want to do this. I want to do that." Right. Um, so this is a very good example of what I feel a technical artist should be able to do, but for some reason no one's doing it. So importing and exporting things from Maya to Unreal is a pain because the units are not the same, the sizes are not the same, and everything's just so convoluted sometimes. And I'm spoiled because at Sony everything runs through Maya, and the fact that I have to rebuild everything in the engine just is not something I want to do, right? So this is a little stray from the rest of the presentation because it's an example of how you can take knowledge and take it really far. So I wanted to help myself take things into Unreal in a very quick and easy way, in a sort of live link kind of way. And I made this tool maybe 2-3 years ago. Yeah, 3 years ago. And what happens is I wanted to be able to just copy and paste. So whatever else I wanted to see it in Unreal. Just that easy, right? So what did I do? Well, I did a lot of research, obviously, but I created a script, and then the script, what it does is it allows me to export an FBX, and this FBX is a certain size, and it comes with all the attributes that Unreal likes, and everything's good, right? So if I made this tool called Quick Unreal Export, and if you run it, what happens is that you're gonna get this nice window with a couple of buttons that do certain things, right? So so let me open that up. Right. So this is another example of knowing Maya and knowing how to tweak it so you can get what you need. Now, this script is very advanced. Like I don't expect, if you don't know how to code, don't. This is not something that I would expect you to do. But it's definitely that anyone can do, because if I was able to do it, I think anyone can make it. So here it is, right? It's this simple window, and then all it is got a couple fields. And if I grab my mesh, as long as my Maya scene is saved somewhere, what this is gonna do is it's gonna spit out the object I have selected to that folder. It's gonna create a FBX folder, and then it's gonna put the path of that export file in the clipboard. So what that means is all you're gonna see on the screen is nothing, because you're gonna hit export and then you go to Unreal and you hit paste, and then boom, done, right? Well, paste on the import window, not the not the level yet. So let me do that. Let me show you how that works, right? So I'm going to go and find this folder, right? So this is where I have my Maya scene saved out, right? So just watch, right? So you come in and you hit export, right? So that creates a folder, and that folder, it put my mesh in there, right? So good, right? So far so good, everything the way it needs to be. So now what's gonna happen is I can open this in Unreal and it will be the correct size. So usually what happens is people work super giant in Maya to a point where it creates all kinds of issues, in my opinion. So, but because in the very early stages I told you that we're going to pretend that each of those squares is 1 meter, I usually work very small, like super small, like miniature almost, right? And when you do import things into Maya, into Unreal, excuse me, you have to make them bigger. So here what happens is, kind of messed up because I forgot to freeze the transforms, but if I do it again, See, it's the exact right size, right? So this is very good because you can export a bunch of stuff without having to worry about where it's gonna fall or anything. Everything's gonna be good. You know, this obviously FB access retain your two UV channels, and you can get a little crazy later with some vertex painting, but I'm not gonna show you that today. So you know, make sure you name your stuff right. You know, make sure everything comes in properly the way it should be. So I'm doing one at a time so you can see how this tool works, right? So I select the tool, hit export, and boom, right? Go to Unreal, hit paste, and done, right? So I never had to browse for things anymore because the path of that mesh is already on my clipboard and everything came in at the right size. I'm doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes, right? A lot of things. But from a user output, like for an artist, this is insanely helpful because it helps them understand things, right? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create the connection between Maya and Unreal. Now, this is not a Python script or anything with like C# code or anything like that. This is like the poor man Maya live link, right? So it occurred to me that Maya and Unreal, Unreal, when you copy and paste something, you actually can paste it on a notepad document, and it has tags, and it's looking for model reference file reference address. So it occurred to me that in Maya I can make a custom attribute, right? And that custom attribute, what it does is that later on it tells Maya and Unreal what I'm trying to do, and then Unreal knows it, and then it just builds it right on the fly, right? So Maya is creating this pseudo document that I was just telling you about. So what you're gonna see now is that I have an entire facade created, and because the models that I had before didn't have those tags, but this ones do, right? I'm gonna recreate that whole thing, and then it should be a simple copy and paste. So this basically allows you to create an entire full level with Maya, which in my opinion is easier than doing it in Unreal. And you know, it's not creating geometry on the fly. What it's doing is it's using the meshes that you already had inside of Unreal. Now, imagine what would happen if you were a super genius who knows how to use Python and C# and all this stuff that I don't know about. You know, you can make some really, really insane tools. So now what you just saw there is that I copy and pasted from Maya into Unreal, right? You saw it in real time, right? Super easy, super simple, right? I'm not the craziest programmer ever. In fact, I'm very crappy at programming, but I know enough to where I knew that this is what I wanted to do, and it worked. So eventually, though, what happens is I go back into Maya and I say, okay, let me grab this, put it in a group, and mirror it over, right? And then I take it out of a group because I haven't quite figured out how to get the transform right just yet.